Welcome to the Filmlings Podcast.
A weekly podcast where we analyze all that goes into effective filmmaking.
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Alex.
And this is week 18, Lying Lynch. And things are still weird on the Filmlings Podcast.
That's right, yeah. We've got a through line from last week, and that was definitely intentional with the surrealist episode we did, because surrealism influences our topic this week in a big way.
Yeah, and as far as modern directors go, when you say surrealism, kind of people's minds automatically jump to David Lynch. So we did want to talk about David Lynch, but we wanted to go to the roots of surrealism first. That's what we did last week. And we are still being surreal this week, and it's the same weirdness with none of the fun.
Yep. Real weird. It gets real weird, gets real dark, but really entertaining. And that's one of the things that I'm interested to talk about this week, is why we like these weird, hard to explain movies so much. Why do they appeal to our brains? Yeah,
so I don't know if we've said yet, but we're talking about the films of David Lynch, and those films this week, we're kind of going back to a, beginning through pretty much end of career. David Lynch is still...
He's still around.
He's still around, coming out with a new show that we'll talk a little bit about. But we're talking about Eraserhead, his first feature, Blue Velvet, kind of mid-career, kind of height of his career, right before Twin Peaks, I believe, or a few years before Twin Peaks, his famous TV show, and then Mulholland Drive from 2001, which is one of the last films he made before kind of taking a film hiatus, I guess.
Right, he slowed down a little bit there once you move into the 2000s, but he's definitely coming back to us with a new old show. And before we jump into his films in particular, let's lay down some facts about David Lynch himself. He was born in Montana in 1946, so that puts him in his 70s right about now. And, we're praying for his health. Hopefully he'll make it through a few seasons of Twin Peaks. I hope so.
Hopefully Twin Peaks makes it through a few seasons of Twin Peaks,
right,
unlike last time.
Not to be morbid, but, it is David Lynch.
Yeah.
He is inherently morbid. He did go to art school, but he dropped out after 1 year because he didn't feel inspired and decided to travel around Europe for 3 years with a friend, after which he spent some time in the States making some short films. He did some work with the newly formed AFI. It was newly formed back then, the American Film Institute. And eventually he moved to LA and started work on Eraserhead, which took a whopping 5 years to make. He was doing it all solo. He didn't want anybody influencing his artistic vision or his creative ability. So he stuck to his guns and didn't go after any investors or anything like that. So it took a while to make, but he did get it made, and that was his first feature film. It turned into a bit of a cult classic, and eventually he would go on to make The Elephant Man with John Hurt as the lead, and that would be his launch into mainstream success. And one other thing we should mention is that to this day, he refuses to explain what his work means. Any of it. We don't know, and he won't tell us.
Yeah, it's his work is very enigmatic, and he's not necessarily like a hermit or recluse or anything, and just kind of doesn't want to influence the way people view his art, other than just like what they can see and speculate in it.
Right, and that seems quintessentially surrealist.
Yeah.
To not explain your work.
Right, but kind of unlike with classic surrealism, like we were looking at, which pretty much has no meaning. David Lynch's films feel like they do have meaning, and they're just presented in a very surreal and enigmatic way, and kind of are daring you to figure out what they actually do mean.
Right. And talking about what they might actually mean, why don't you take us into our most nonsensical of the films? At least I think so. It has a through line, it has a plot line,
right?
But it's the weirdest to watch.
Yeah, Eraserhead from 1977 is definitely the most classically surrealist, in the fact of, I mean, first of all, it's black and white, and it has the most strange images, and it's kind of built on a kind of the whole structure is built around the surreal images as opposed to kind of being sprinkled in there for effect. But basically what it's about is a guy named Henry Spencer, and he's invited to his girlfriend's house to have dinner with with her parents, and then they say, "Hey, our daughter had a baby, and you're the father." And then we find out that the baby is a weird mutant creature thing. I don't know how really to explain it other than to say it looks like E.T.'s head wrapped in a body bandage.
Yeah, it looks like a bad ET doll with like petroleum jelly slathered onto it.
Yeah, it's very disturbing, which is how we describe the entire film.
Yeah, it doesn't trigger that part of your brain that makes you feel sympathy for a baby because it's cute.
Right.
Which I think is important.
Right, because after the first 30, 40 minutes or so of the movie, of this sequence of having dinner and everything, where it's almost told like a normal story. There are some really weird things that happened. Mary, his now wife's family, kind of acts very strangely.
Yep.
But then after that, once we get back, they get married because they have a baby now, and then eventually she leaves because she's very annoyed with the baby, and so Henry is left with the baby, and it drives him crazy, basically. And we see lots of strange images that are floating around Henry's head and dreams, and yeah, a lot of weird stuff happens that all culminates at the end.
Yeah, and I should mention one of the things that I discovered while researching this film is that it is supposed to be set in a dystopian industrial wasteland.
Okay.
Which, you know, when you look at it, it does. I just thought it was a city, but
right,
which might say something about our cities, but it does. It's supposed to be an industrial wasteland.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a very stark and bleak kind of setting, and it's all black and white, very low-key lighting and stuff. So, like, at the beginning, we get a good 5-10 minutes of just Henry walking, and we're just kind of experiencing the environment as he's going from the store or something to his house or to his apartment.
Yeah.
And he uses the black and white, like, really well. It definitely sets a mood, sets a tone, and that's kind of how I would describe this film, as more atmospheric than narrative.
That's very true.
It gives you a feeling more than it tells you a story,
right?
Because it's all about it's kind of about how a new father who is not very enthralled with having to take care of this baby, which is kind of weird because at the beginning Henry seems very likable, very kind of happy to have the baby. Almost like he'll come into the apartment and then kind of look at the baby and smile, but then he'll like go to his bed and just ignore the baby.
Stare at the radiator.
Yeah, stare at the radiator.
Yeah. Yeah, and before that first walking scene even, we have a weird little prologue of sorts.
Yeah.
About what I'm guessing is the conception of the baby.
Yeah, so we get a lot of strange, surreal imagery of basically egg and sperm, but it's really vague and weirdly shown, where the egg looks almost like a planet.
Yeah, it looks like a big rock planet.
Yeah,
and the maybe sperm, we don't know, kind of takes the same shape that the baby does.
Yeah.
Later on, like the baby's got a really big head and a long body.
Right. And then there's also this kind of enigmatic character who pulls levers and looks out a window.
Yeah, and he's got like a scarred, burnt body.
Yeah, it's never really explained. I don't know if that's supposed to be God or if it's supposed to be like chance or something, because at the beginning he pulls the lever and the sperm goes towards the egg. So it's like, okay, so this is the causal force for this baby happening. And then something else happens with him at the end where he's trying to pull the lever and it's sparking and stuff.
Yeah.
But he's never addressed by the film. He's just kind of presented to us.
I thought it was kind of like Inside Out. I thought it was a dude inside of Henry's head, because we kept having those overlaid zoom outs from Henry, where we're coming out of his, I think, either mouth or ear. One of the two. I might be confusing it with Blue Velvet, where we come out of an ear.
Yeah, some orifice.
Some orifice, which is also a Lynch signature.
Strangely,
yeah, kind of zooming out of things. As you'll notice over the course of this episode, Lynch has a lot of really regular signatures that he keeps coming back to. But one of the things that I think you start to see in Eraserhead and then follows through big time in Blue Velvet and later Twin Peaks and later Mulholland Drive is, I think it comes from the surrealist ability to stay in a moment. So maybe not every, I always look at these films and I'm like, especially like Mulholland Drive, and I'm like, you could probably chop off a half hour of blank space from that movie. But if you did, the tone and the feel and the atmosphere would be completely off. And I feel like the same as in Eraserhead. There's a lot of moments of people just walking, people just looking at things for a really long time, where we've already received the information from the shot, but there's more tone to be conveyed from the shot by letting it linger. And I think that's a really strong point in Lynch's work that makes it stick out in people's heads, is his ability to stay in a moment and let us feel the space.
Yeah, I think I felt that more in Eraserhead than in Mulholland Drive, because in Mulholland Drive things are actually happening even if they don't seem relevant. But in Eraserhead, like you said, it's a lot of walking or waiting a full minute for the elevator door to close and and go up. But it sets this kind of lingering, moody tone. And the black and white helps with that a lot. It's very impressionistic, and the way he uses it, there, for the most part, it's pretty dark and stuff throughout. But there are moments where it'll either go almost entirely black, and a woman's face will like emerge out of the darkness in one of the most terrifying points for me, at least.
Yeah.
And it's not even like anything scary happening. It's just a really unnerving, I guess, sort of visual. And then there are other points when he'll flip it and white will be the primary color, and with a little bit of black relief for very specific points in the film.
Yeah, I've it sounds strange, but I've always had this curiosity of what it would look like in a theater if you only had a bright white screen on, as like being projected, like the film being projected was just a bright white screen. But I've never seen it before until we watched Eraserhead in a theater.
The first time that something like that stuck out to me was the Dark Knight Returns. Because the title came up and it was all white with just the black words, and it just kind of like flooded the theater with light. It was really
interesting. It's a lot of light coming back at you.
And it's not something that's used very often, which makes it really effective when you do that. And it's definitely effective in this film.
Yeah. Like a lot of surrealist work and surrealist influence Lynch, you get a certain... I don't want to say confusion. I want to say shock factor, if that feels right, or a stun factor, where things make you perk up. Like when you see an all-black screen for a little while, or an all-white screen for a little while, or a really shocking image like a creepy little E.T. baby.
Yeah.
and it makes you perk up and be like, what is going on? So you stay interested in the film, and it adds a little something here and there. And if you use it enough, it creates a tone and a style. And that's what Lynch has kind of done. And you really see it in Eraserhead, where he's doing all this very, very weird stuff.
Yeah, and it's all of it culminates to build, like we were saying, a feeling. It's like it builds this strange kind of delirious feeling in your head, kind of the same way that a new parent would feel when they're not used to having to take care of a child who's constantly waking them up and taking a lot more attention than they're used to, especially unexpected parents who weren't expecting to have this responsibility thrust on them. So it puts you in the mindset more than telling you a story about what is happening, which is a departure from kind of the early surrealism, where those surreal images are used to create this feeling that kind of tells you something about parenthood, rather than just trying to shock you into rethinking the way that you operate in life.
Yeah, and I feel like we should tackle those specific parenthood themes that we see in Eraserhead. Because if we haven't mentioned it, or it hasn't sounded like it yet, this is a very dark movie. It's basically
all of these three are. So let's just
but
blanket statement. These are dark movies.
Yeah, especially in the black and white. I think this one feels the most like a horror movie. The others feel like dark psychological thrillers with maybe a little bit of noir thrown in.
Yeah.
But this one feels like a horror film.
But not in a jump scary kind of creature horror kind of way. Like there is a creature in it, and but the creature isn't scary. It is kind of terrifying him or terrorizing him, but not in the way that Godzilla does or something.
Right. It's not a clown coming out of the sewer. It's just this. It's this overwhelming feel of uneasiness and creepiness and worry that kind of like permeate both the film and the experience of watching the film together. So it's pretty dark, and it's a pretty dark take on parenthood itself, because Henry does not respond well, and he kind of goes into a psychological tailspin over the course of the film.
Yeah, and we didn't look up how this film coincides with the birth of any of David Lynch's children, but I would assume
he already had one child at this point. But over the course of the film, or right after the film, I can't remember exactly which, he was divorced from his first wife. David Lynch had and has a lot of relationships.
Okay. But yeah, it definitely feels like a film that was coming out of personal experience.
yeah, that dread that I think he felt at being a new dad. Uh-huh. And it's not like, so I want to be clear, we're not accusing Lynch of being a bad dad or anything like that, but I think he might have tapped into that what I think is natural fear that every new parent feels. And kind of expounded upon it, and then took it down a really dark path, because that's just where his artistic sensibilities lay.
Right. It was just kind of this feeling that he had during a certain period of his life that, like a lot of creative types do, they experience something and then they go, okay, what if we take that experience and push it to the extreme? Like, what would happen if a different person were put in this situation who couldn't handle it?
Yeah, in a dystopian industrial wasteland
right.
where the baby comes out looking like a deformed little E.T. monster.
Yeah.
So a lot of what ifs
right.
in the process.
Right.
But you're right, even going back to last week with Louis Buñuel, who is a surrealist who kind of is just supposed to do freeform stuff, a lot of it comes from personal experience and memories. It's just a natural artistic creative response that we do as humans.
Absolutely. And the last thing we should probably mention before we move on, because I think we'll have stuff to talk about in each of these, is the sound design. Because David Lynch's sound design is very intentional. and also sound design and music. I guess we could put those together because
Right.
music plays a big part in all of David Lynch's work. But the sound design specifically in Eraserhead is a kind of I don't know how to describe it, but it's like the Foley work overwhelms anything else. Like it's primarily Foley driven,
yeah.
I will say.
Yeah.
And you want to explain what Foley is real quick?
Yeah, so Foley is a process that happens in post-production because most of the sound you hear in a film is not what you call production sound, what is heard on set when you film a scene. There's a lot of problems with that. There's background noise, so it's hard to hear dialogue. The car crash doesn't sound just right. Horses' hoofs don't make that perfect coconut clanking noise
Right.
that you want. So you go in post and you have a special artist called Foley artists who will make those noises. And it's actually pretty cool. They have these big rooms full of just the most random objects. And if you're picturing...
But there's specific random.
There's specific random objects that they use to make noises. And if you're picturing those guys from Monty Python who run behind their masters and clank coconuts, then you're pretty right.
Spot on.
It's exactly that, except they do stuff with more than coconuts. And
so for example, kind of
the dog scene.
pretty standard ones are, for punches in a fight or something, if you whack a head of lettuce, it'll kind of make the same kind of thwack and crunch sound. And they'll have, little buckets or little trays of things to step on. So if you're walking on gravel or grass or snow or something, there's different things that the Foley artist will actually step on in sync with the music. It's actually, I've always it's a really choreographed and kind of technical thing that I always wonder how long it takes to get it just right because you're doing it in sync with all the action.
Yeah, and that's a pretty unique skill to develop.
Right.
Like I want to be a Foley artist, and then you just practice making noises.
Right. Well,
right?
Turn the music off or turn all the sound off on your TV while you're watching a movie and just kind of make sounds.
Although I guess the same sentence that I just said could be used for a lot of people. Like, you want to be podcasters, practice making noises.
Making noises.
You want to play violin in an orchestra, practice making noises. There's just different kinds of noises.
Yeah.
But it does get intense. They even do stuff for when clothes move. They have different kind of cloth noises. It gets very specific. And to bring it back to Lynch, he does Foley very intentionally, and you can feel that intention because, one, it's super loud.
Right.
And two, it provides a very specific intention in each scene. For instance, when he goes to visit his girlfriend's house for the first time, you just hear this really loud series of sucking noises. Mm-hmm. And then eventually, like a couple minutes later, you see that it's a dog who is feeding her litter. And that overpowering sound, that overpowering baby feeding noise is basically plaguing both the audience and Henry. And it's kind of foreshadowing the impending information drop that, hey, you're a dad.
Right. And it meshes with the other technique we were talking about of how long this film takes for things to happen. So he's sitting down with Mary on the couch and then the mom on a chair somewhere else, and they're not saying anything, or they're taking like long pauses in between bits of dialogue. And during all these breaks, all we're hearing is that sucking sound constantly in the background. So it doesn't let you forget that feeding process is happening while the family is getting ready to do their feeding process.
Right. With those little creepy chickens.
Yeah, there's even some weird surrealist stuff that happens, before we get into the baby nightmare.
Yeah.
This weird artificial chicken that they're eating starts moving around on the plate.
Yeah. He preps you pretty well with a series of Lynch weirdness before going into a sequence of Lynch weirdness, which I think is pretty smart. Might not
Yeah, but he
have been
hooks you with an
intentional, but
almost normal story.
with an almost normal story. He's unexpected fatherhood.
Right, but at least
Taking a horrible turn.
At least it's a fairly traditional, narrative process to get there. As far as we're seeing people talking and doing this, and there's only a couple
I'd
weird
still
things
say
that are
that there
happening.
is a 3-act structure in this movie.
Yeah, and as far as more traditional narratives go, I think the most, I almost want to say normal, but the most traditionally told story is Blue Velvet. So, Alex, you want to set us up for that?
Yeah, so Blue Velvet came out in 1986. So by this point, David Lynch had reached mainstream success as a film director with The Elephant Man. This was still before Twin Peaks, which was in the early 90s. So he wasn't quite as famous as he is now. I feel like Twin Peaks definitely set him apart. But with Blue Velvet, we see a more traditional narrative and maybe a bit of a early view at what Twin Peaks might look like, or those thoughts percolating through David Lynch's creative brain.
Yeah, those themes that he seems very fascinated with are kind of all thrown into this movie and then get expounded on and taken to the nth degree in the Twin Peaks show.
Yeah. So we for this film, we're going to the small, idyllic town of Lumbertown.
Yeah, Lumberton.
Lumberton.
But yeah,
it's basically Lumbertown.
It's a little town that does lumber.
Yeah, as all the radios keep telling you.
Yeah, in a very
Get out
groundhog.
there and chop that wood.
It's very much like the radio in Groundhog Day. It's just too happy for what's happening.
I could tell you anyone in Lumberton could tell you how much wood a woodchuck could chuck.
Oh my gosh.
I'm paraphrasing.
No, that was almost the exact line.
Yeah, it was pretty close. It was something along those lines. So we're taking to this idyllic town, and we're presented with all this idyllic imagery, but our story begins when a man has a stroke, and his son Jeffrey, our protagonist, our main character, returns to his hometown, Lumberton, to visit his bedridden father who can't speak, and really doesn't play much of a part in the storyline. But
It's just a reason for Jeffrey to come back from college.
Yeah. And he finds an ear in a field.
Yeah, just finds an ear in a field.
Finds
No
an
big
ear
deal.
in a field that we zoom out of first.
Right. And it looks like it's been there for a while.
Yeah, so we find the ear in the field, and that kind of launches Jeffrey's intrigue into an ongoing mystery. The secret, kind of dark underbelly of this idyllic little town. It's not like a secret empire or anything like that, but there is a criminal aspect to the town underneath, and Jeffrey kind of starts to get sucked into that by this ear. He takes it to a detective who tells him, don't worry about it, but we'll investigate it. And then he meets the detective's daughter, Sandy, who he kind of recruits to be his sidekick / pseudo love interest along these journeys.
No, she's definitely a love interest. They're two love interests.
Yeah.
It's hard to tell which takes precedence.
Right. So he, after getting some information from Sandy, Jeffrey and Sandy go to visit a woman who they think might be involved in this mystery. And she's basically at the center of this mystery.
Yeah.
The blue lady, Dorothy Valens. And Jeffrey also kind of has he definitely has a love interest with her. But things are more complicated than that, because Dorothy Valens is basically being, I don't want to say it's called blackmail, but a criminal has kidnapped her family, her husband and her son, and is holding them hostage in order to, quote, get her to do things.
He's using her for his own gratification.
Yeah. And that criminal's name is Frank, played by Dennis Hopper, who is a total psychopath.
Yeah.
Totally crazy, all over the place. And he's our bad guy, the villain. He's our bad guy of the villains. He's our bad guy of the film. And his erratic behavior versus Jeffrey's curiosity He says he wants to solve this mystery and gather evidence to help Dorothy and to solve a mystery, but he also kind of just feels obsessed.
Yeah,
and
we get
stalkery and voyeuristic.
He says that. But there's one point early on in the film that's kind of telling where Sandy asks, "Are you a detective or a pervert?" And he goes like, as out of all the things he could have responded, he says,
Right.
"That's for me to know and you to find out." And he says it kind of playfully, but
Yeah.
it still kind of sets you on your guard. Like, all right, he's got
she
weird
laughs,
stuff going on.
But word of advice to anyone out there: if somebody gives you that response, run.
Yeah, get out of there.
Run.
That's not the right response to that question.
Yeah. So definitely there's a crazy story. It gets weird. I feel like a lot of the surrealism in this one. We definitely have surrealist images like the ears. We have the opening sequence with the zoom in on the Beatles.
Yeah. Okay. So I will say this is probably the least classically surrealist, I guess, because there's not necessarily any unnatural images. It's more strange and unusual kind of images. And then, like you're saying, the Beatles is kind of a throwback to classic surrealism as far as L'Age d'Or that we talked about last week, starting with the Scorpions. But this one doesn't kind of acknowledge the Beatles. It just kind of, does it because, again, David Lynch is a very atmospheric director. So he's creating a tone, like he's showing this idyllic little town, but he's got this kind of soothing, almost eerie music playing in the background with, is that Blue Velvet, that first song?
Yeah, the first song, I think the first thing they say is Blue Velvet.
Right, so...
Sorry, I can't sing.
Blue Velvet is the song that Dorothy sings at this club that she sings for. And it becomes kind of the running motif, symbol kind of thing, because she has
song.
a blue... Well, right, the song, but also just literally blue velvet because she has
she
a
literally
blue
wears blue velvet
robe.
She's
and
called
Frank
the Blue Lady at the club.
Yeah, and Frank is strangely obsessed with blue velvet, and he always has a little piece of it that he holds and caresses all the time.
Fondles.
Yeah, that's a good word for it. Right, but the way kind of surrealism comes into this film is through some of the transitions. Like there's an image of the flame on a candle wick flickering that with a really low kind of windy sound that it transitions us in and out of things, but also kind of leaves us feeling strange and unnerved.
Right. And this film is in color. I think I can't speak for Elephant Man, but I feel like everything, at least after Elephant Man, was in color from David Lynch.
But at least Eraserhead and the Elephant Man were in black and white.
Right. So this one is in color, and Lynch really likes to pop reds, blues, and pinks very meaningfully. He does it very on purpose.
Yeah, he likes to kind of overlap reds and blues, so put them in the same frame and kind of dial up the saturation, and it's a very stark contrast.
Right, but not make purple.
But they don't make purple. No, it's like red against blue, or red curtains and a blue light, like we see in Mulholland Drive.
Right.
And then pink is kind of its own thing, where he associates it with the innocent character, or the character he wants us to associate with innocence.
Right.
And he really makes it pop and stand out in those instances.
Yeah, and we also see a lot of the film itself is not in black and white, but we see black and white motifs in places.
Right.
That are used very intentionally.
This is also pretty classic film noir or neo-noir because it is in color. But it's also kind of impressionistic. The way I see it is almost early Tim Burton, like Edward Scissorhands kind of use of color and set design, because in Dorothy's apartment, we have the hallway, which is all painted gray, which kind of, it almost looks like it's just, toned down and stuff. But if you're paying attention, like, it's just a hallway that they made painted gray, and there's only like little touches of red, almost like a smallpox kind of thing, where there's the fire alarm and the exit and stuff. So it looks very sickly. And then her apartment is all red.
Except for the kitchen, which is in black and white.
Yeah, with a little bit of yellow, I think, in the counters. But the floors are all this checkered black and white. But we don't spend a ton of time in there.
And Jeffrey dresses in progressively more black and white. He's more
darker,
starkly dark black and white as he gets more entranced by the mystery and more obsessed with the mystery.
I almost saw his clothing like almost like Jimmy Stewart's character in Vertigo, whose suits get kind of progressively darker. With the offset tie, because that's it's a almost comparable character where he gets into this mystery, and it just kind of the obsession of it takes over his life. Yeah,
and Sandy dresses in pink.
She's our pink
basically all the time, because she's kind of like the more innocent one who's just kind of getting dragged into this on the side.
Right, and the other Hitchcockian tie-in is with the two female love interests. Is Sandy is blonde and Dorothy has black or brunette hair, which is kind of a classic, Hitchcockian archetypal, innocent blonde and kind of deceiving or corrupting brunette kind of character.
Right. And you see a lot of Hitchcock in Lynch's work.
Yeah,
and especially in the film noir pieces, which a lot of his have film noir influences, but they just combine that with surrealist weirdness and atmospheric design, which makes for a really interesting combo, and it's really enjoyable to watch. And you see definitely more in this one, a lot of those really signature David Lynch tropes. And we should definitely talk about some of this recurring imagery that we see in a lot of Lynch films, because even though he tends to get weird in a little different way in every film, he tends to there's definitely specific images and specific things that happen in films that he likes to have happen. For instance, red curtains, checkered floors. He loves those.
Yeah. And actually there's a couple things that we didn't mention from Eraserhead is there's curtains, there's a song that kind of, once you hear it, you're thinking about it for the rest of the movie. By a very strange character that Henry imagines is in his radiator.
Yeah.
But that, whenever he has those imaginative scenes about the lady in the radiator, she's standing in front of draped curtains, which we don't see the color in them because it's black and white, but we can assume that they're red.
Oh, they're red.
They're very red. And then she's standing on a checkered floor, which creates a really stark image, especially in black and white.
Yeah, and he's stuck with it. We see it again and again.
Right.
He also he loves crooner music, which is what we see in all three of these films. Right.
And like we were saying, the music plays a big part, especially in this one, because the song is the title of the movie.
Yeah, for sure.
And kind of describes the movie, too.
Also true.
The lyrics of this one.
Blue Velvet. It's a really good song. It's easy to get hooked on this song as it plays, which I think is kind of the point.
Specifically made for this film, I assume?
I wish I knew, because that would be awesome to know. And we don't just see these images pop up in only his filmography, but also his television work, pretty much signaturely Twin Peaks, which is also set in a logging town,
right,
and has a deep, mysterious underbelly, and even has the same actor, Kyle MacLachlan, playing the lead. In fact, if you really, it's not a jump to think that Jeffrey is
far leap.
Is Dale Cooper. the lead from Twin Peaks. He's obsessed with mysteries. He likes solving it. He's kind of creepy.
Dale Cooper was a little more fun, I guess.
Dale Cooper was much more likable.
And he didn't give any hints of a really disturbed past.
Also
but
true.
Other than that, it's almost the same thing.
Right. And then set in that town, you basically have the primary colors popping. You have green because it's freaking everywhere, reds and blues.
Right. And then you've got, even in Twin Peaks, you have the Red Room, which is red curtains and a checkered floor.
Right. And you definitely have this juxtaposition between the idyllic front of the town in both Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks, and then the kind of dark secrets among the people who live there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And David Lynch has some kind of fascination with adultery because it's a really big theme in a lot of especially Twin Peaks. I don't think there were any characters that weren't having an affair in Twin Peaks. And then Blue Velvet has kind of a 50%. Weird twist on that.
Eraserhead has it.
Eraserhead has
Mulholland Drive has it.
Right. So, like I say, it's kind of perforated through all of David Lynch's
and it's not
stuff.
just like a one shot in each film too. Like there's a couple where it's only like one character, but most of them, it's like almost everybody.
It's played down a little bit in Eraserhead, and in these films, it's not as many characters. It's pretty pivotal to the story, but like Twin Peaks, it basically is the story.
Right, and I feel like that hints at a fascination for Lynch, or at least a fascination I feel when I watch his movies, is that contrast between the front and the secret. Like what do you see on the outside and what do you see underneath?
Yeah, what's really
and this
happening.
kind of mimicked in the way he shoots it. You see, it's a lot more subtle in Twin Peaks, but in Blue Velvet especially, it is hammered home in that opening sequence with the kind of like lush green yard and this really, really soft lighting that gets used all throughout the film. It's like they put at least...
Yeah, but that's also kind of, the signature of Twin Peaks, because that is the theme song, is this, very soft music playing,
right.
Kind of nature shots of the town, very slow pans, and it's everything that you're seeing is beautiful. The music is beautiful and the images are beautiful, but when you combine them in that way, a kind of slow moving, lazy kind of floating imagery, it becomes eerie and it becomes unnerving. Like, I keep using that word, but
it's accurate.
That's how most of these films make you feel. And like, again, David Lynch is an atmospheric filmmaker, and it's all about creating a feeling that associates with whatever you're watching.
Mm-hmm. Which is the strength of a show like Twin Peaks. And why it sticks in your head is because
you keep watching, because
you feel it, and it's a weird show.
80% of Twin Peaks is kind of boring soap opera stuff. Honestly, I mean,
unless
it's all
you're
about
into that.
right. But it's all about, like, everyone's cheating on everyone else, and it's just kind of, okay, we kind of get it, and it's kind of cheesy.
Right.
But there's 20% of totally insane, crazy stuff that's like hinting at something way bigger,
way deeper
going on.
And going back to the Blue Velvet opening sequence, that's kind of how it takes place. You see this ideal, you see it happen.
Right.
The guy has a stroke, and then he falls down. This hose is still going. There's a dog barking. There's a baby wandering around the yard. No one ever tells me who that baby's.
I forgot about that.
Whose baby is that?
Who knows?
And then after everything falls apart, you zoom into the grass and see these really gross looking beetles.
Again, with that Foley played
around.
up to 11.
Oh yeah, it's mostly gross because it sounds gross.
Right.
Crawling around in the mud. So, and that might not have been intentional, but it definitely reads that way, where you see this idealism and then you zoom into this kind of nitty gritty.
Oh no,
underbelly.
that's definitely intentional.
Yeah.
But then there's the other point about the sound design is there's at least one specific point where Sandy had made a plan to honk her horn to warn Jeffrey when anyone was coming up to the apartment that he had just broken into. But he flushes the toilet right at the moment that she honks.
The loudest toilet on earth.
Right, and it overpowers the sound of the honking. And that happened in Eraserhead, where I guess they were right next to a train or something that a really loud noise would happen and drown out the audio.
Right.
And this almost goes back to Buñuel, because I think especially in The Screech Charm of the Bourgeoisie, there were a couple points where a plane would just randomly go overhead and cut out the dialogue and stuff. Mm. And the characters would be like, what? And then they would start talking, and it would just happen again. Just that manipulation of sound to obscure or reveal certain parts of the story. Right.
It's all very intentional filmmaking that is kind of idiosyncratic compared to most of what you see in the mainstream. And that, I think that's what part of what makes Lynch's filmmaking so enchanting is it feels so unique, it feels so intentional, it feels so atmospheric. But with that, let's move on to our final film for this episode, Mulholland Drive. And Jonathan, do you kind of want to try to explain what's going on in this one?
Yes, but I can't. I'll just...
Yes, but I can't.
I'm going to describe it as you are supposed to read it when you're watching it. So...
Yeah, don't no spoilers.
Right, no spoilers. We'll talk a little bit about spoilers in a second, but
we'll try.
Mulholland Drive, which is considered David Lynch's masterpiece and one of the greatest films of the century so far, or the greatest, depending on where you're looking. It is about, well, we start off with a woman in a car. She ends up in a car accident and crawls her way through LA. She's on Mulholland Drive, crawls through LA and sneaks into an apartment just to kind of, rest and heal her wounds and stuff. And then the woman who lives at the apartment, her niece comes to stay there and finds this woman there. She calls herself Rita because she doesn't remember who she is. She has amnesia. So then it becomes the journey of Rita and this young aspiring actress, Betty, to kind of find out Rita's identity and figure out what happened and who she is and all this stuff. But we're also building dread and this, again, sense of unease through little things like, first of all, the fact that Rita almost doesn't... They don't go the route that you would go if you're trying to find out who you are. Like, you wouldn't assume that you've done something wrong and not go to the police. That was one of the main things I had at the beginning. It's like, why don't you go to the police if you don't know who you are? You know? But then there's also these little vignettes. And the beginning was almost Pulp Fiction-y in the way that you've got different storylines happening almost. You've got this guy... We suddenly cut to the scene in a diner where this one guy is talking to someone who's kind of like his boss or mentor or something. We get that feeling just from the way they're talking, but we're never told anything about either of these characters. And he describes this dream that he had. And then there's another scene where the worst assassin in the world is trying to pull off a hit.
Oh, man. He's so sloppy.
And ends up killing like 3 people because he can't get this one faked suicide right. But we're not given any setup to those scenes. They're just kind of there to kind of show that there's some darker thing happening. Yeah. And it's not this like city that nobody knows this time. We're in LA. So this is a very well-known location, but things go kind of crazy and we realize, that the story is not what we think it is by the time we're at the end. So I don't want to say too much more than that, but in the last 30 minutes of the film, everything changes.
Everything changes.
Everything changes. Not in the everything changes in the way that we're perceiving the story, not necessarily in the story itself.
Yeah, so this is a film that wasn't originally intended to be a film. The first 2 hours were intended to be a TV pilot, but it wasn't picked up. So David Lynch quickly wrote a ending. They shot an ending and then put it all together, and that's why the last act. Well, you feel a shift, but at that point. Between the first 2 hours and the last 30 minutes. And it ends up giving it this really weird combined, like you were saying, Pulp Fiction, kind of a Memento.
Yeah,
type
Memento
vibe
too.
to it, where you're playing with reality and time, first and jumping around the vignettes in the first 2 hours. And then what happens... spoiler. I'm not going to say it, but we're not going to say it because of spoilers. What happens in the last half hour that, changes everything.
It changes everything. Yeah, in this film, like going back to the whole atmospheric thing, like when the film ends, you kind of are, it's one of those movies where it ends and you just have to sit there and be like, whoa.
Yeah.
Kind of in the same, like, dramatically, I felt this, you feel it at the end of Memento when you're like, oh, dang. And
right.
Like other movies, like The Talented Mr. Ripley was one that I was thinking of, because at the end of that movie, I was just you just leave with this weight almost.
Yeah.
Not an understanding, but almost.
Where you're just kind of like questioning reality.
Yeah.
At the end.
Yeah, you just. It makes you think, and it makes you want to watch it and try and figure it out, but you don't know if you ever will be able to.
Yeah.
And I think this is something that David Lynch has with the original Surrealist, where it feels like David Lynch's films have a meaning, but also he doesn't ever feel the need to explain it. Like you were saying, literally in real life, where he doesn't want to talk about it to the press or anything, but in his movies, they don't want to explain themselves in the same way that, Buñuel's don't, but they don't have an explanation.
Yeah.
But David Lynch is like, there's something there. It feels like if you dig hard enough, you could find it.
But you might not. And I feel like that's part of why we like them so much. And why they've remained so popular. I don't just mean when I'm not using the royal we. I'm saying we as consumers of media like David Lynch's work, even though it kind of I don't want to say betrays, but like it messes with you. It intentionally messes with you at the end and leaves you feeling dazed and confused.
Yeah, he's a master manipulator.
Yeah, and then at the end,
similar but different way to Hitchcock.
Yeah, and then you feel confused at the end, but you're also kind of like, I kind of liked it.
Yeah,
like you dug the vibe, you dug the mystery, you dug the weirdness, and it kind of reminds me of how Jeffrey is obsessed with the mystery in Blue Velvet. If you go back to that,
yeah.
Where maybe it's not a healthy obsession.
Definitely it isn't.
like don't sit there and watch Twin Peaks 10 times unless you want to. I mean, it's good.
That would probably mess a person up.
But that might mess you up a bit. It's not worth worrying about too much, but it's fun to think about.
Yeah.
And that's definitely a big point in Mulholland Drive, where I think we or Lynch, not we didn't make the movie, where Lynch really messes with time and reality a lot in this one.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is about Mulholland Drive is almost in a similar way to The Prestige. He's telling you subtly from the beginning almost what's going to happen. And he's trying to put you on your guard, but he still slaps you in the face at the end. There are just so many points where either through the way the film is made or through literal dialogue, he's telling you that this isn't isn't what you think it is.
And I like this movie, but I'm kind of sad we didn't get to see it go to series.
Yeah,
Although
it would have been
maybe
interesting.
that's a good thing. Maybe the series would have been awful after one episode.
Yeah,
But
I almost feel like it would have been almost too close to Twin Peaks in the
Just
way
set
that
in
it's
LA.
set up at the beginning. Yeah, just set in LA because it's the same kind of, it's this fun detective story with these two women with this kind of darkness happening underneath.
Yeah.
Is kind of the same feeling that Twin Peaks had.
and the director's story happening in the background.
Yeah, and then
The director's having the worst day of his life.
that's the other thing about this movie is that it almost feels like it literally is a movie about movies, but it
Right.
feels like a commentary on films and the ways that films can manipulate you and stuff like that because it's set in LA. It's about making movies.
Right. And even if you look at the audition shot where we start off on a shot of three girls singing, of course, a crooner song.
Oh, that one. Yes,
And
I love
then
that shot.
You pull out and you see a recording studio around them. So you're thinking, okay, well, it's not a live performance.
Yeah, they're recording it for the movie or something.
whatever. And then you pull out farther and you see the recording studio is on a sound stage. It's on a film set. So it's like a triple
And
or
then-
double psych out.
But even that makes you think about it, and then you're like, okay, but then there's another camera that's filming this scene pulling out.
Right.
So he's almost like doing the thing that you're always told not to do, which is taking the audience out of the movie and telling them that it's a movie,
Yeah.
He's breaking the illusion 4 times in one, 30-second shot or whatever.
Right.
And it's incredible.
Yeah, which is kind of the point. And let me just also say, that was a ridiculously expensive way to do auditions. Who would do that? No one.
Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of weird that was the audition because they're in full makeup and hair
Yeah,
and
they're
everything.
full makeup. They've got like a full crew there,
Right.
Just like for the audition, which obviously it's suspension of disbelief. It's just for effect within the movie because that's what we think of when we think of a sound stage. That's it, and like you were saying, we're emphasizing that we're watching a movie, and that gets hammered home more if you see a full crew.
Right. And there's like the idea of an audition is kind of a big point in this film, or like has some pretty big implications. And the other significant audition that Betty goes to, I was kind of scrubbing through the film on Netflix this morning to refresh myself, and that audition, which is also a little bit of a turning point in our brains about characters and about the story, happens at the exact middle of the film.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that this point is literally the pivotal point of the film, right in the middle.
And to go back to kind of those surrealist ideas and the surrealist imagery, images, or maybe just fantastical at this point. We have characters who are actually doing supernatural things. We have
Or are they?
or are they? We have the psychic who actually seems to actually be psychic. She's a neighbor at the apartment complex and is essentially telling them that
There's danger.
there's danger associated with one of the
Another element
women
that
there.
causes an atmospheric effect, kind of
Right.
builds a dread in us, even if she kind of gets laughed off as his kook in the movie.
Right, and then we have the cowboy who
Oh, what with the cowboy?
who actually seems to be some kind of supernatural being of some kind. Like he's got magic powers, maybe. I don't know.
Here's the other thing. The other tie-in to Twin Peaks is we have the actor Michael Anderson, who is the dwarf from the Red Room in Twin Peaks, and he's also kind of this mysterious force in another kind of realm almost, because he's only shown in this room that only exists with him, and maybe there was a bodyguard in the room, I don't remember.
Yeah, I think so.
But the room has red curtain walls.
Shocking.
Yeah. It's almost like a real life version of the Red Room from Twin Peaks, whereas in Twin Peaks it's almost this ethereal
Oh, okay. I
Kind
get
of-
what you're saying.
kind of limbo, I guess the Red Room is. I don't know how to describe the Red Room.
It's red.
Right, but that's kind of where Michael Anderson lives there and where he is in here, and it almost feels like it's a flip side universe of Twin Peaks, and Michael Anderson is almost controlling all of like this David Lynch extended universe of stories, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Which I think you could pull off if you tried to make that a thing.
The Lynch Cinematic Universe, the LCU.
The Lynch Cinematic Universe.
Yeah, so with that, let's jump into overall notes with our spoiler section.
So we can stop dancing around the end of Mulholland Drive.
Yeah. Except I don't know if you can really pin it down. We can take guesses. What's your guess, Jonathan? What do you think happened?
As usual, we're getting into spoilers. So if you would like to watch these movies and go into them fresh, Mulholland Drive is definitely an experience. So pause the podcast now. But all right, let's get into it. So I'm going to try this. So at the end of Mulholland Drive, or at one point, the two women go into this saloon called Silencio, or I guess it's not a saloon, it's like a auditorium.
It's like a theater.
Right.
Yeah.
And this guy comes out saying,
No hay bando.
No hay bando. No hay bando.
Yeah,
there
like
is no band.
No hay bando.
Over and over and over again. There is no band. This is a recording. This has all been pre-recorded. And then he shows us. He's like, look, a trumpet. And a guy comes out playing a trumpet, and then he takes the trumpet away from his mouth, and the sound keeps going. Mm-hmm. It's all been pre-recorded. And he tells us this over and over and over again. And then...
And apparently people pay to see this.
Right. And then a woman comes out and sings this heartbreaking song into the microphone. We have close-ups on her. Our two main characters are weeping, and...
She literally faints.
Right. But this goes on for... Oh, the singer. Yeah.
Yeah.
The singer faints, and the song keeps going. And you have forgotten that it's all a recording by the time, because it's such a moving song. You get sucked back into it. And it was like, I mean, at least I did. I was watching, and as soon as he goes, this is all a recording, I'm like, okay, I got this. Okay, something's happening. It's all recorded. And then it still was like, oh, shoot, I should have seen that coming, you know? And then Betty finds this box in her purse randomly, which associates to a key that Rita had in her purse when she was found. So they go and they open the box, and then we go into the box, and then we come out in the real world, supposedly.
Apparently.
Where it turns out that Betty is actually named Deanne and Rita is named Camilla, and they knew each other, and then like there was this whole other thing happening, and everything we've seen for the last 2 hours was a dream of Deanne being distraught that Camilla, her lover, was getting engaged to this director guy, and was going to stop seeing her, and so she hires a hit on Camilla.
From the worst assassin ever.
Right.
Who we saw earlier.
Well, if he is the worst assassin ever, because that was all part of this fever dream, because she goes back to her apartment.
It might not be part of the fever dream. Those vignettes from the earlier scene from the earlier part of both the hitman and the director, Adam, could be real.
I don't know. I don't know. But the thing with the director is that wasn't really his wife. He walks in on his wife having an affair, but that wasn't his wife if he's about to marry Camilla.
Well, if he was about to announce that he was engaged to Camilla, it could have been, hey, me and Camilla are engaged, and then he goes home later that day and serves divorce papers to his wife.
Okay, that's possible. Everything is possible.
Engagement isn't a legal.
That's true.
Standing.
Everything is possible. And we know David Lynch has a thing for
messed up.
Adultery. So
yeah, it's kind of messed up, but it's possible.
And then she sticks a gun in her mouth after being terrorized by these two old people who we don't even know.
Yeah. No, that was just some weird surrealist imagery. That
is the most surrealist part. Is the so we saw these two old people at the very beginning of the movie, when
Yeah, they
Betty,
seemed to be
quote
Betty's
unquote,
grandparents or something.
not even, they were strangers.
Oh, they were just strangers.
They were
who were just hanging
strangers
out.
who had met like on the plane or on a train or something on the trip over, and they started talking and become friendly. And these old people are like really strangely, specifically old people, where they do this like pat over the top patting on the knee. I watched that and I was like, oh yeah, that's a thing old people do. And it was like David Lynch is telling
It
you,
just happens
these
when you
are
cross
old
that
people.
border into old. You start knee slapping.
You start patting on the knee way over the top. But then, yeah, as she's having this nightmare, they like literally get up in her face, go, and it's
so
terrifying. Weird. And then she shoots herself in the head, and smoke comes from her bed. So like the last 10 minutes of this film are extremely surrealist.
And then the cowboy comes in and revives her. It looks like the cowboy comes in and brings her back to life.
No, that was earlier.
That was right before this, right?
That was, yeah, before all this happened. So they had found her body as part of the detective thing. And then when they go into the blue box, that's what happens, I think.
Oh, okay, I gotcha.
Is he wakes her up because she had to tell the rest of the story, I guess, to the audience.
See, it doesn't make that much sense, but we like it.
Yeah, I only had time to watch it once this week, but this was probably one of those weeks that we should have rewatched the movies. Alex had already seen them before, so this was the second viewing. But how much more sense did it make to you?
A little
bit,
maybe? A little. I saw what coming, so I saw what was coming. So
you can watch for it a little bit.
I could watch for it, but I didn't really pick up on any new clues, and
it doesn't destroy the experience of watching it. Same with a Nolan film or something.
Yeah, true. And the bum still scares the bejesus out of me.
Yeah.
It freaked me.
Confusing. So, yeah, there's Michael Anderson in the Red Room who feels like he's kind of pulling the shots because he's trying to force the director to choose a woman to be cast named Camilla Rhodes, but has the face of Naomi Watts, who plays Betty Deanne.
Naomi Watts plays a lot of characters in this movie.
But then, the other thing is that that weird transformation whenever they find the dead body, and then Rita decides that she needs to hide her identity because she might be associated with the death. I don't know why they connect those things, but they end up making her look exactly like Betty.
Yeah.
In this
they're
really
like, let's
weird...
get their faces already look similar enough. And then they were like, let's put you in blonde hair too. And I'm like, oh no.
Yeah.
No, I can't tell you apart. Except one had like...
And they put her in red and black. And so...
Oh, yeah.
Let's go back to our colors thing. For the first half of the film, we have our same, Hitchcockian female dynamics. We have Betty, innocent, wearing pink lipstick all the time, blonde hair. And then we have Rita, who is kind of the more mysterious character because she was in this car accident. And we got the sense at the beginning of the car accident that there was this weird kind of dark thing she was mixed up with because the two bodyguards who are like gonna kill her or something. Like, we don't know what's happening before the car accident happens.
Yeah.
And she has all this money in her purse for no reason. So she's kind of the mysterious brunette that's involved in some darker things. But then David Lynch flips that whole dynamic on its head when we find out that Betty Diane ends up being the psychopathic character who's kind of driving
the
this
crazy
whole
Killer
thing.
X.
Right.
Yeah. But those, I will say those, it's kind of hard to understand, but it feels like it should make sense.
Right.
It feels like it should make sense. And all those weird things are interesting. Even in the first few minutes of the film where we see like the bodyguards are about to kill Rita in the backseat of the limo, and they never, supposedly it's part of the fever dream. Yeah. But we don't know that for sure. And they never explain it. It's just really interesting.
Yeah, and they never explain the bum, and they never explain Michael Anderson.
Yeah, it's a bunch of...
Or the cowboy.
And part of that is honestly because it was supposed to be a pilot. So all those things were at least supposedly supposed to get fleshed out.
Well,
But
that's the other thing I was going to say, as far as going back to this idea that David Lynch's work doesn't feel the need to explain itself. So in Twin Peaks, that's kind of what always happened, is he would set up 10 mysteries, explain 5 of them, and then set up 10 more. So now you
Right.
have 15 mysteries. And
Right.
by the time the show ended up getting canceled, nothing, like, some things had been explained from the beginning, but there were about twice as many things that were unexplained. And you got the sense at some point that they were never going to explain it all.
yeah.
It was like it was just going to keep building mysteries and never finish explaining them. So we'll see what the next season does.
Yeah, and this and the unexplained mysteries don't feel as infuriating in Lynch's work as, say, Lost.
Yeah,
That-
well,
that upset a lot of people, and I think the difference.
I can't talk to Lost. But
And I think the difference might be that Lynch's work never promises that they're going to solve everything. It kind of just promises mystery. And if you ever explain everything, you ruin the mystery. This isn't a podcast about Lost, but to talk to fans of Lost, that's kind of what the disappointment felt like, is the not all the mysteries were solved, and the mysteries that were solved didn't feel super satisfying at the end. But the early seasons were really enjoyed because you were just exploring all these mysteries, and you were seeing new mysteries and new dynamics come up. And that is the zone that Lynch works in and stays in, is more mysteries, more unexplained, more weirdness, more really interesting stuff that's idiosyncratic and you can't see in other TV shows on the air. And I think that's what pulls in fans and keeps them watching. And it also, it leads to great fan communities. People who like discussing fan theories.
yeah.
Lynch's work is ripe for the picking.
Yeah,
when you
and
consider that.
I think there is a way to, wrap up mysteries and stuff like that. But
Oh, for
if
sure.
you're
I mean,
going
that's
to,
the standard way that most films will do it. They will resolve most of what happens. But
Right.
Lynch operates in a pseudo-permanent zone of mystery.
right. So I feel like when you get to the point of the level of saturation of mystery that Twin Peaks or Lost has, you either have to wrap it up extremely well, like no loose ends, like really tight,
Yeah.
which I haven't seen Lost, but it sounds like Lost failed to do, or you have to answer enough mysteries that people get a level of satisfaction that doesn't fall below their level of frustration at the new mysteries.
Right,
So
right.
there's some balance there that David Lynch has managed to kind of corner the market on, I guess.
Right. He's kind of learned to walk that tightrope and other cliches.
Right, because
but-
you get that sense of mystery in like Christopher Nolan's work, like especially The Prestige, where
Yeah.
you're not sure exactly what's happening, but Christopher Nolan promises to wrap it up satisfactorily, and he does every time. Right.
Yeah. So I think, and I think that's one of the reasons that Lynch will always hold a specific fascination for myself is that he is able to leave us without everything solved and wrapped up in a nice tidy bow, but we like it, which is interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. So with that, we are looking forward to David Lynch's upcoming work, however much of it there will be from here.
Right.
With Twin Peaks returning on May 21st, and we'll see if anything has changed from the way that he tells his stories.
Yep.
The interesting thing is that when the show was slated to come back last year, anyone who knows the original show knows that pretty much the last thing that was said on the show in the Red Room was, "I'll see you in 26 years or 27 years or something."
Mm-hmm.
And last year was 27 years from the time that the show was canceled. So it would have been a perfect return. Lots of logistic issues happened, so it's coming back this month.
Maybe it'll start in medias res, and they actually were in the story. They returned to 2016.
Right, they were
but-
back last year. So we don't know what will happen, and we may not know what happens after we see it. So
Yeah, but free plug of the week. Make sure to check it out if you dig Lynch, if you dig surrealism, it's definitely a treat. And go check out the original Twin Peaks. It's still on Netflix.
Right.
And it's weird, and it got canceled early, but it's really satisfying to watch.
And that new season of Twin Peaks airs on Showtime.
Yes, on Showtime.
So what do we have next week, Alex?
Yeah, so let's talk about next week. Next week, we will be discussing the writing and directing of Nancy Meyers with our guest, Andrea Millard. We're going to be taking a look at 3 of her films: Baby Boom from 1987, The Parent Trap from 1998, and The Intern from 2015. So we're looking at a transition from being a writer to being a director, and we are also going to be taking a look over a very long spread of a career and see the development there. So it should be a very interesting week. A few cult classics in the mix. And
Absolutely.
as always, we look forward to having a guest.
Yeah.
Well, that's about all the time we have for this episode.
If you have movie suggestions for us or just want to reach out, I can be found on Twitter at @JSSatchel.
And I'm at Alex Geringer.
And to find links to things that we talked about today, you can view them on the blog at thefilmlings.wordpress.com.
If you like the show, let us know. Leave us a review on iTunes so other people will know what we're all about.
We definitely appreciate it.
Talk to you next week.
All right, see ya.